welcome to St. Jerome's University and to this special Graduates Association event. Tonight we are presenting the 2002 Distinguished Graduate Award, the Father Norm Choate Distinguished Graduate Award, and also hosting the Graduates Association lecture. We have as our special guests Michele Diemanuele and her husband Tony. Michele is going to be presented with this year's Distinguished Graduate Award. We have Terry Downey and his wife Margaret, who are ironically themselves both Distinguished Graduate Award winners in the past. And we have a bit of a Downey trifecta tonight because not only are they both here, but the award which Michele will be receiving is a painting by their son, Bill Downey, which is called Wintergreen, and which is of St. Jerome's from, I believe, the position somewhere in the middle of Laurel Creek. I think that's the vantage point that you have in that picture. And finally, just to launch the whole event, I would like to read a few words to Michele that were sent to me by Father Choate. Father Choate is in Florida, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to persuade him to come back here for this event, but he did send along these words. Michele, please accept my most sincere congratulations on being awarded the Distinguished Graduate Award by the alumni. I have been gratified and honored to have my name associated with this award. The award has been true to its informing principle of recognizing people of service generosity and commitment to the common good. Your service has certainly been true to that, and I am proud to offer my congratulations. Father Norm. And now the first speaker for this evening's event. I'm pleased to introduce, bringing introductions and welcome from the university, our president, Dr. Michael W. Higgins.
Thank you, Harry. And welcome, everyone, all of you, graduates, friends, and special guests. Tonight is a night of celebration. In fact, we celebrate Michele and her achievements, which are considerable. We celebrate effective teaching with Terry, who's our guest speaker this evening. We celebrate the treasure that is our alumni, our graduates of St. Jerome's University. We celebrate the leadership of Father Norm Choate, who was president here for many years. And we celebrate the role, the presence, and indeed the legacy of universities themselves. As I say, welcome all to this evening. One of the pleasures of being a steward of an institution like St. Jerome's is the opportunity to meet many of our graduates in their own or current environment. For instance, during the summer, Harry Froelich, whom we've already heard, the Director of Development, and I went off to California and Arizona to meet many of our graduates. One of them has changed careers, and now he's a dental hygienist and working in pastoral care in the School of Dentistry in Arizona. And what he talked about as a dental hygienist were the principles of social justice, what he felt could be done in a dental school and in terms of pastoral witness in a dental chair. Now, figure that one out. But the commitment, the energy, and the inventiveness were remarkable. We met an insurance broker with a keen and well-developed conscience, a remarkable level of public success, and a very real sense of what it means to be family. An engineer and an entrepreneur whose memories take him back again and again to those early days in which he was shaped in terms of his Catholic moral vision. And at that time, she's since changed, the vice president of Levi Strauss Marketing Division, who looked back again and again to the determinative and essential role played by Catholic education and by our teachers here at St. Jerome's. They're graduates who witness our best values, and they are important. They are our primary treasure. And they are linked in an important way to the shaping function of the teacher as model. Again and again, whether it doesn't have to be California or Arizona, it could be Montreal, it could be the Maritimes, it could be Ottawa, wherever we've gone to meet our graduates, again and again we're reminded of the role that was played in their lives by a teacher, or by a member of the staff, or by a chaplain. It's very humbling to note again and again they never say a dean or a president. In the grand biblical tradition of great genealogies, echoing the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 1, you will note that in tonight's proceedings, Harry begat Michael, who begat Dana, who begat Patty, who begat Michelle, who begat Terry, who begat Harry. It's my writing, it's late at night. Now, this is not to suggest that we think in circles at St. Jerome's, only that we covet symmetry and order. After all, you always return to where you began. Dana Whiteham, Michelle's friend and the registrar of St. Jerome's, and herself a graduate, does not speak in circles, but she knows and values viscerally the importance of roots, of continuity, and to returning to one's own intellectual and spiritual home. Dana.
Good evening. Thank you, Michael. I'm delighted to be here this evening, although I'm not sure I can honor the not talking in circles thing, but I'll do my best. I'm particularly delighted to be here to take part in an event which honors an old friend and which features the insights of an even older friend. Just kidding, Terry. When Harry invited me to be part of this evening and he outlined the order of events, I thought what a perfect meshing of people and ideas this was. I get to introduce Michele, whom I have loved and admired for a long time, and celebrate her many accomplishments in the political realm, in public service, in the community, and in her family. We have the opportunity to learn from the experience and wisdom of another distinguished graduate of St. Jerome's, Terry Downey, a former professor of political science on this campus, the current president of St. Mary's College in Calgary, and someone with a history of community contribution and no small amount of family experience himself. And to top it all off, the focus of Terry's remarks tonight, a liberal arts education, is a topic near and dear to my heart. With such a stellar combination of individuals and ideas, we're almost our own episode of The West Wing. So I can think of no place I would rather be than here tonight. The Bartlett. Let me turn now to my main task this evening, which is to introduce to you the recipient of this year's Father Norm Choate Distinguished Graduate Award, Michele Diemanuele. Michele's many accomplishments are notable. She began her career as a co-op student in political science when she served 4 terms with the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. From there, she moved to the office of the Premier, where, fresh out of university, she was in her 20s at this time, she served as David Peterson's social policy advisor. From the political realm, she moved to government public service, where she served in various capacities in the Ministry of Community and Social Services, Citizenship and Labor, the Attorney General, and Health. Her contributions throughout this time included the development and implementation of policy, research and analysis, strategic management, the establishment of new agencies, program delivery, communications, and the design for restructuring of the Ontario Public Service. Who says you can't have a career with a degree in arts? In 1999, Michele was named one of Canada's top 40 under 40, a national award that highlights the accomplishment of Canadians who have reached a significant level of success but have not yet reached the age of 40. The recipients of this honor are chosen for their vision and leadership, innovation and achievement, community involvement and enhancement, impact, and growth strategy. Michele was one of only 2 public servants recognized in 1999's group of 40. A little over a year ago, Michele moved to the private sector, where she is continuing to develop her skills as Vice President of Human Resources and Organizational Development at Brookfield Properties Limited, Canada's largest commercial property manager. In addition to her career accomplishments, Michele has served as a member of the Toronto Board and the Ontario Board for Multiple Sclerosis. She is a current board member of the United Way of Toronto, the largest United Way in Canada. She has been a past member of Defence for Children International, and she has sat on the St. Jerome's Graduates Association executive. Michele is married to St. Jerome's grad Tony Diemanuele, and they are the parents of 2 little girls. I think it's safe to say that Michele's life is full. I hope you will forgive me if I concentrate less on Michele's many accomplishments. I could spend the entire evening simply reading her list of career and community contributions and the comments of those who know her and have worked with her in various capacities. But rather, I'd like to focus more on Michele herself. I am more familiar with the spirit, the personality, the character of Michele, those things which make up the person who has achieved these goals and who continues to make her mark on the world around her. I have indeed loved and admired Michele for many years now, but I would be less than honest if I said that it was ever so. In fact, my first impression of Michele was, well, it was overwhelming, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was overwhelmingly positive. I was a Don at Notre Dame College in the 1982-83 school year, and on the first day of orientation week, all of the Dons were gathered in the foyer of Notre Dame to greet the first-year students who would be living on our floors. Those students came, they checked in with Sister Diane, who was the director of residence. She welcomed them and then directed them to the appropriate Don, who would, in turn, show the young woman to her room. As I was standing there awaiting my young charges, I looked up to see a young woman enter confidently, nay, brashly, stride towards Sister Diane. She was wearing glasses, big, bold, red-framed glasses. She was loud. Not that loud is necessarily bad. I've been accused of being loud myself on occasion. And she had a take-no-prisoners kind of approach. She was accompanied by a gentleman who I would find out later was her brother, but I'm afraid I couldn't tell you very much about him. I'm not sure he said anything, and if he did, it was overshadowed completely by the very presence of Michele. Anyway, I remember thinking to myself, please God, don't let her be on my floor. And seconds later, I heard Sister Diane say, "Oh, then Dana will be your Don." I gulped, gritted my teeth, pasted on a smile, and went forward to meet the individual who was to become my greatest supporter that year, a trusted confidant, and my dear friend. That alone should have been enough of a lesson about judging books by covers, but to add a little extra oomph to it, I also greeted a young woman that day who appeared sweet, demure, timid, the girl next door. "I'm so glad she's going to be on my floor," said I. Of course, by the end of the second week of classes, I had kicked numerous men out of her room. You will remember that in those years you were entering a no-man zone when you came into the women's residence. Michele and I have often laughed about my completely erroneous character judgment on that occasion and the trouble you can get yourself into when you judge on appearances alone. In that hasty and misguided first impression of Michele, I would discover one of the things I admire most about her. Michele has one approach to most things, and that is straightforward. She is never likely to be labeled subtle, and as a result, you know exactly what she thinks and exactly where you stand. She uses that straightforwardness to great effect, as I discovered for myself early on. Early in that first year as a Don, Michele approached me to tell me that the Notre Dame women were going to field a ladies' flag football team in the Intramural Recreational Sports League here on campus. "Are you going to play?" she asked me. "No," I said, "but I'll come out and watch and cheer you on." She leveled me with her best stare and in her most disgusted tone said, "And you call yourself a leader?" The next day, I started my Notre Dame football career. Despite its guilt-induced beginnings, it ended up being a lot of fun, and I played for the next 3 years right through graduate school. Michele, if I recall correctly, hurt her knee a couple of games into the season and could be seen cheering effusively from the sidelines. And you call yourself a player? I've been on the receiving end of that straightforwardness, but I've also been the beneficiary of its great effect. After I had finished graduate school, I was working here at St. Jerome's doing secondary school liaison, and I was looking to spread my wings a little as far as my career was concerned. When Michele learned that I was looking for a job, she told me to send her my resume. She was working at the Ontario Legislature at that time in Premier Peterson's office, and she told me that the Liberal caucus was looking for speechwriters. I sent along my resume. If I recall the recounting of this correctly, she took my resume to the individual who would be hiring for the position, threw it on his desk, and said, "If you're going to have a bunch of political hacks working in here, you'd better get at least one person who knows how to write." That's the kind of reference that opens doors. I did indeed get an interview, and never one to allow me to go in unprepared for opportunity, Michele coached me before the interview. "Bring samples of your writing," she said. "Read this kind of stuff in the newspaper. Summarize it. Oh, and by the way, the guy who's going to be interviewing you is an actor." Having just written a book review for a graduate course on actors acting Shakespeare, I threw it into the portfolio. At the point in the interview when he was going through my writing samples, Craig pulled out the book review, scanned the title, looked up over the paper and said, "Michele told you I was an actor, didn't she?" "She might have mentioned it," I said. They offered me the job. I appreciated Michele's efforts as she laid the groundwork for that opportunity. And I also appreciated the way she stood back and let me sink or swim on my own. That is also another of Michele's gifts. She is ready to do her part, establish a foundation, forge a trail, and then let others do their bit. I think it speaks to her confidence in her own abilities, her trust in others, and her willingness to work as a team, well, except maybe for football, and to welcome the contributions of the people around her. I could go on about Michele's many gifts, her energy, her intelligence, her good humor, her friendship. But I cannot speak to you about Michele without talking about what is, for me, Michele's single most important attribute and accomplishment. Early into my friendship with Michele, I learned that she lived alone in Toronto with her mother, who was suffering from multiple sclerosis. At the time that Michele came to school here in Waterloo, she and her mother had moved into the Crombie Park complex of apartments in downtown Toronto. Those apartments were equipped for individuals with physical handicaps, wide spaces for wheelchairs under counters, lower light switches, etc. So Michele's mother was able to get around and take care of herself, with the occasional assistance of individuals who would stop by to help. Michele went home every weekend to be with her mother and to take care of household needs. By that point in her mother's illness, even though Elizabeth was able to still function quite well, Michele had completely taken over the financial and physical running of the household. No matter what social event or activity might be taking place in the residence on weekends, I never once heard Michele complain about going home or about the responsibilities that she carried. As my friendship with Michele grew, it became more and more evident that the burden of care she bore for her mother was indeed a labor of love. Having had the privilege of spending some time with Elizabeth Mallett, it was clear that some of Michele's own strength of character and energy for life came from her mother. Elizabeth had an irrepressible sense of humor. I remember one very special occasion when Michele and I and her mom went to see a play. I think it was a chorus line, at what was then the O'Keefe Center. Afterwards, we went out for coffee and dessert, and I can't remember what it was, but something set us off into gales of laughter, the kind of uncontrollable hysteria that has you snorting and squealing and wiping the tears from your eyes. While Elizabeth was able to move and feed herself, her motor function was impaired by the MS, and her hands shook while they held her fork, and her aim wasn't always accurate. That night, Elizabeth was eating carrot cake with cream cheese icing. I remember this clearly. And the combination of her less than perfect aim and our bout of uncontrolled laughter meant that there was more cake on and around Elizabeth than there was in her, which to all of us, Elizabeth included, seemed even more funny. After the hysterics had subsided and we were able to survey the cake fallout, Michele did something that was so simple and which obviously came very naturally to her, but which was to have a profound impact on me. She picked up a napkin and gently, lovingly wiped her mother's face. In that moment, I knew that whatever else Michele might be, straightforward, loud, bold, funny, she was also one of the most loving people I had ever met. In that moment, our friendship was sealed. And in that moment, I had a model of how to love. I spent that weekend with Michele and Elizabeth, and there was much more laughter and more moments of tender care. Michele and Tony waited to get married until they could afford to buy a house so that they could move Elizabeth in with them. And on Michele's wedding day, her mum, by this time physically ravaged by the MS, was by Michele's side. Through those early years of our friendship, I could relate to Michele's dedication to her mother because it reminded me and supported me and comforted me in my own relationship with my grandmother, who was the great love of my life. Michele's mother and my grandmother died within a year of each other, and I remember when we spoke after these losses that there was not much to say. It was as if each of us knew that the magnitude of the grief was too great for words. But I only had to think back to that day in the restaurant when Michele wiped her mother's face to know what it meant. Michele's accomplishments are many. But from where I stand, if she did nothing else, no public service, no outstanding career, no community involvement, she would still be a distinguished graduate of St. Jerome's for the witness she provides of a daughter's love. At this time, I'd like to call forward Patty Tush from the St. Jerome's Graduate Association Executive Committee to make the presentation, and I am honored to present to you this year's recipient of the Father Norm Choate Distinguished Graduate Award, Michele Diemanuele. Michele.
First off, just so we're clear, 13 weeks on crutches, okay? It was not sitting on the sidelines. 13 weeks with a totally torn leg. Anyway, It's been an interesting day for me. I started the morning off in Oakville. I was in New York around noon today, and I'm in Kitchener this evening. I've had a lot of time as I've been heading to airports, sitting in airports and cabs to reflect on this evening and to do it without the sort of hustle and bustle that might sound contradictory, but in fact it isn't. I had some alone time today, which I haven't had for a little while. And as I was reflecting on this evening, and it's interesting you would talk about circles, because that's in fact exactly what went through my head today, was the circle that has occurred in my life over the last 2 decades. And I reflected on the accomplishments. Dana was talking a little bit about that. Sometimes we don't stop to enjoy it as much as we need to, and we should with others. And I was reflecting on some of those accomplishments, the community work, and there's been lots of community work, labors of love, as Dana mentioned. And I reflected on the number of students, just even in the past year, who've come by my office, who I've mentored in a number of different ways, either from this university. I did my master's program at the University of Toronto through public service mentoring, etc. And I reflected on those relationships and what those have given to me, as well as I think what I hope I've been able to impart on those individuals. And I was reflecting on public service in general and the importance of it being in New York City today. It's hard not to think about the importance of public service as you go by every fire hall in New York, and it has a gigantic flag and pictures of people who are no longer with us, and the importance that that infrastructure brings to a democratic society. So I was reflecting on that as well. And as I was thinking about these, and often if you knew me well enough, you would know I don't actually think that logically, so there was bits and pieces going on, and there were some phone calls in between, but it was my alone time, I promise you. And as I was reflecting on that, I was thinking about St. Jerome's, and I was thinking about the foundation that it provided me for the last 2 decades. And I was thinking about the lessons, the life lessons I've learned here, and we call it a Catholic education, but it's a life's education. It is an enormous foundation that I have been extremely privileged to be part of, but more importantly, it has given me the tools to do many things over the past couple of years, and certainly over the last 2 decades. It's so depressing to talk about 2 decades of one's life. And I think about the charity runs, and I think about the masses on Sunday, and I think about the community work that we did, and I think about the mentoring that I got, whether it was Father Norm and the faculty here, Kevin Donaldson, Dana, I see Rob in the audience. There are so many individuals who have come through this organization who have taken the time to mentor that new kid on the block who may be looking a tad bold or a little bit aggressive. But they take time out, and those things matter. And if we think I somehow magically woke up one day and knew that if a student came to me and said, what am I going to be when I grow up? What can I do with my education? If we think that I had some magical answer, I didn't. I learned it from someone else who taught me. And most of those people came through this university. And I've been fortunate enough to remain friends with many of them. And I think about the tolerance that I was taught in this very diverse community, and the set of values that it brings. And again, I've been fortunate to work in the public sector for most of my career in situations where we're dealing with very vulnerable individuals, and that kind of tolerance and set of values and set of principles I learned here, and I was able to advance work by virtue of that foundation. And there are 2 stories I want to tell quite specifically when I think about that sense of community that I've been able to, I think, draw upon in my formative years, those early years as a student coming out of high school, who, I need to tell you, I thought I was going to U of T until I dropped in here one day by accident with a friend. And that sense of community was absolutely penetrating. You could feel it, you could smell it, you could taste it. And I'd never heard of this place up until that point. But I knew the minute I walked through the dorm at Notre Dame that I was going to come here, and I immediately asked for Dana as my Don. But there are two stories I want to tell you. The first one is I, somewhere along the way, decided in my first year, after I had had a lot of fun the first, 3 or 4 months, that I thought I might do something in economics. I wasn't the strongest in math, so I thought I'd take a math course. And we were at the end of the year, and I realized that I might actually fail this course because I was struggling. Math at Waterloo was hard. And without even asking, you're a young student musing around your residence saying, oh my God, I've got this test and I'm struggling. There were 2 third-year math students who said, come on over, we're cramming for our finals as well. We'll get you through it. And that, for me, was indicative of the kind of support that a community gives others. And again, I think that I've tried to advance that as I've worked through my own career and my personal life. And the other story is about my mom, and it's sort of fitting given what Dana was saying. She is correct. I did go home every weekend, and in fact, I left Thursday nights. I managed my schedule so that I was here Monday mornings and out Thursday nights, and home Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and left Monday morning again. And there was, we were heading into finals, and I needed to study hard, and there was a weekend where I just didn't think I was going to be able to get home. Somebody from across the hall who knew I lived not too far from Union Station in Toronto said to me, I'm heading home to Toronto. Do you want me to stop in and check on some things? Make sure your mom's okay, go to the market and get her some groceries if she needs it, or what have you. And again, that kind of sense of community, that sense of value, that sense of giving, and those sorts of things you don't forget. And again, I'd argue that that's the kind of community that this represents. And the faculty and the individuals who come to this university, I think, personify a set of values and beliefs that are unique. And I have traveled a lot in Canada, and I've been to a number of universities, and I've attended another university, and it is unique here, and it's a wonderful feeling. I have a couple last things to say, and then we'll get on to the important part, which is hearing about liberal arts education. As I've indicated, I do believe that my time here at the University of St. Jerome's provided me with a very fundamentally principled education. And I use the word principled very specifically. And, these days, the sense of morality is actually making its way back as a good thing, as we read about the Enrons and those sorts of things. And the sense of values and principles are, in fact, considered to be a good thing again. And I think that is a testimony to the kind of society we want to be. And as I think about going forward, I am encouraged and hopeful that whether it's St. Jerome's or the other institutions out there that are starting to stand up and take notice of the fact that we need to, in fact, build foundations for people that aren't just solely based on credentialism. Those things are important too, whether you have your accounting degree or you're a lawyer. Those are very important accomplishments for individuals. But life is very, very complex and very simple in some ways. And I think a liberal arts degree and a liberal arts education, and more importantly, a Catholic education at the University of St. Jerome's, it gives you the tools to deal with what life has to offer as you move forward in the future. The good, the bad, the ugly. And I know, for me, that without that, a lot of aspirations would never have come true. A liberal arts education, particularly at this university, makes aspirations outcomes. And for that, I am eternally grateful. I want to thank Dana and for her friendship, which has, Dana and I don't see each other very often, but when we do, it's like we've never, ever been apart. We have a profound respect for each other. She is the best writer I know. And certainly Peterson sounded a lot better when she was on his staff. You're very fortunate to have her here because I know she has a great passion for this facility, this university, this community in which the university sits. And passion is a great thing. You can do anything when you have passion. So thank you, Dana, for the nomination. Thank you to the selection committee for making a bold choice. And I look forward to listening to Terry Downey, who I'd like to introduce now. For those of you who know Professor Downey, you will know that he is an individual who is very interested in political data. He likes to look at those trends. He likes to understand what's going on out there. So I want Terry to know that when it was announced that I was going to be the distinguished grad this year, and that you would be speaking, I had a number of phone calls. So I did track them. There were 19 calls from individuals who I know who said, "Say hi to Terry. How is he? What's going on? Where is he?" I had 10 calls congratulating me, so that's 19 to 10. If I was to discount the fact that on those congratulation calls, it was actually after they spoke about Terry that they got around to saying congratulations to me, that really would make it sort of 24 to 5. But what I'm really trying to illustrate is the profound influence this gentleman has had on a number of people as they have crossed both this campus and also the main campus in the political science department. I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I actually finished my degree through correspondence and some special arrangements because I needed to actually be at home as my mom was getting ill, or more ill. Terry was instrumental in constructing a program for myself and another individual so that we could actually finish our degrees from this university. He is somebody, my cousin came to this university and had Terry as a professor. My cousin's about 8 or 9 years older than I am. And, he came away from Waterloo saying it's a really fun university and you got to get Downey because he's just great. And so, even as a young sort of high school student, I had heard of this guy. And then I arrived here at the University of Waterloo and several of my friends, and although I did not have Professor Downey for as many courses as several of my friends have had, I can tell you he was the academic advisor. His door was always open, and he really did help individuals shape and mold their futures. He created leaders, not followers, and that's a very special gift. And he has a rigor in his ability to both dissect what the underlying issues are for an individual, for a situation, and to really present solutions and to give people options and to make them think they can do it. And teachers are very special. I think deans and presidents are too. But teachers and educators are very special, and Terry is one of those very special people. He has a whole host of fans out there from this university, and we are very delighted that he has been recognized in the past for his work, and very delighted that he's coming to speak about an important subject. Terry Downey.
Well, thank you, Michele. If you to embarrass me, I'm glad to see I've had a positive, or you said at least I've had a positive impact, and I want you to know how relieved I am when I meet students that I've taught sometimes. And I met one not very long ago in Calgary in a store who said to me, "Didn't you used to be Professor Downey?" And I said, I was still around. But you don't know how relieved I am to hear you say what you did, because when I see students after many years, I wonder what kind of permanent damage I've done. And it's nice to see that in your case you've kindly forgotten whatever that was, and that you remember only the good. I'm very pleased with the introduction. It was so nice to see Michele tonight. It's been a number of years, and of course I've followed her career with great interest. I want to begin by congratulating you then, Michele, on being awarded the Father Norm Choate Distinguished Graduate Award for 2002, and that's named in honor of a very remarkable person that we both know and respect. Norm Choate came here as, this was before you were born, presumably, when I was an undergraduate in 1964. I think he came here when I was a student here, and he had a great impact on my life, the main one being that he kept me in school when I wanted to do other things, so he made me stay. So we would be interested to hear what you had to say tonight. There is no greater reward, I guess, for those of us who teach than to witness in those we once taught or mentored, and this is your case, of course, the development of their potential to the point of distinguished achievements. This is particularly true in Michele's case because I have such a clear memories of your gentle personality. I don't remember you being loud, actually. Once you got across the creek, maybe your behavior changed. Your gentle personality, your leadership abilities, I remember those very clearly. Your compassionate character, your sense of humor, your intelligence, and of course the great potential that all of these characteristics suggested. And the joy of teaching in a place like this, and it was, I have great fond memories, of course, of being at Waterloo teaching. The joy of teaching is that you see people that have those kinds of abilities, and you get to relate and work with them every day, so it's a wonderful thing. But in the major point being, though, that you see the development of those characteristics, that you know that this person has actually achieved the great promise that was once there. So it's an honor for me to be here to witness this public and very much deserved recognition of Michele's remarkable achievements, and they are remarkable. To say that I admire her is understatement. She has already had a most distinguished careers in both the public and private sector, and is a credit to herself and to her family and to this university. And she is so not simply by virtue of the fact that she's had this meteoric rise to the top in both the public and private sectors, which is something that's unique pretty near, but also because she's chosen to handle her success in the manner in which she has in terms of her public service and philanthropy, including her already significant efforts on behalf of this university. I think that is the most gratifying point, and Dana referred to some of those. So it's a great privilege for me to be part of this, to be here, to see you get this award, to see you recognized, and to be part of this. It's also a privilege to be asked to address your friends Michele and other members of the St. Jerome's University community and all those present this evening. I thank you and St. Jerome's for this kind invitation. I thank President Higgins and all members of the St. Jerome's University community for their warm hospitality this evening, and for the warm hospitality that's always extended to me whenever I visit this campus. It's always a pleasure to be here, and for me this is coming home as well. I'm a graduate of here. Margaret is a graduate of here. We have 5 children that graduate from here. We should have got a group rate. We didn't. And 5 have already graduated, and there's one that's 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through almost. And another couple that are thinking. So we're trying to hold our end up in appreciation for all the things that they've done. As advertised, the topic to be addressed this evening has to do with education. And when you talk about education, I always think of the words of Robert Frost, the American poet, who said, "Education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper." So I'd appreciate if all of you will keep your tempers in check while I have a chance to talk about this. But the topic is about education. But before I start with that, I am a political scientist, and Michele is a political scientist, even though I guess you are practicing. I was going to say, even though you're not practicing, you're always practicing when you're a political scientist. It never goes away, even if you're not working for government or directly involved in it. and certainly Michele in her responsibilities now and before this time has been practicing. But anyway, as a practicing political scientist, I thought I might share some of my political insights in the province of Alberta and the city of Calgary, because Michele's firm that she works for, or where she is vice president now, Brookfield Properties, has properties in the city of Calgary. In fact, their properties dominate the Calgary skyline. And to give you an idea of the politics of Calgary, one of the properties that they have is the Petro-Canada Centre. And the Petro-Canada Centre was built at a time when the federal government owned Petro-Canada. And you might imagine then the reaction that might have. The fact that the building has to it a red hue, it's glass, but it's got some sort of red cladding on it. And it's lovingly or unlovingly known in Calgary even yet as Red Square, sometimes the Kremlin. Or even the Kremlin, I've heard people talk to about that. And one of the most interesting occasions I had when I first arrived in Calgary was to get into an argument with somebody to convince them that the NEP actually had not benefited me personally, and if I'd appreciate if they wouldn't put it to me personally, because it's kind of a sore point. Anyway, Red Square is now the center of attention again because we have a new version of the NEP coming along according to the government of Alberta. To say that Alberta on the provincial scene is the only one-party state this side of Iraq is not entirely true. It is the home of a couple other minuscule political parties known as the Liberals and the NDP, and it's also not true if some have suggested that it's a criminal offense to belong to either one of those parties. It's close, I sometimes think, but not quite. From time to time, there arises in Western Canada a version of a separatist party. There's one currently in the works called the Western Concept Party, which is held a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and its politically aggrieved founders find that Ralph Klein's conservatives are not quite conservative enough. So every once in a while you get these kind of parties arising. So then you move to more than a one-party system. Our premier is, to put it mildly, different. He's the only premier in Canadian history that I know of that was honest enough to admit two things. A, that he had a serious drinking problem. I understand there's been a few since before that had it too. But he actually admitted it. And that not only did he admit it, but it was affecting his job, and that he was going to stop. And to his credit, and to his great credit, he has, apparently, although some people think he was a better premier before, and he has since. Every once in a while, somebody tries to give him a moral uplift, but he's a hard man to elevate, as you can imagine. And occasionally, he gets counseling how to make him more refined. And I've thought this is something like trying to put ballet slippers on a Clydesdale. It just doesn't quite work. All that having been said, he has amazing electoral success, as you know, and he's probably the shrewdest politician in the country, and he will be as prime minister or premier out there as long as he wants to be, no matter what he says about the environment or anything else. Every time he gets himself into hot water, which he does occasionally, he admits that he made a mistake, and he's going to try to do better, and his standings go up in the poll. It's very interesting to watch. Federally, the Liberals are pretty much an endangered species in Calgary and elsewhere in the province of Alberta. They have a couple foxholes in Edmonton, but that's about it. That is it. Mr. Clark is the member for Calgary Centre, kind of a Robinson Crusoe figure because he's surrounded by a sea of alliance members in all directions to the horizon. And that brings up, of course, the topic of the reform, what is now called the Alliance Party. Margaret and I lived in Mr. Manning's riding, and now we live in Mr. Harper's riding. In the last federal election campaign, none of the people running for the Alliance had to bother putting up signs. There was no use. They didn't have to. The Liberals and NDP made a little token signs, but that's all. Any party that's been led in a brief period by three individuals who absolutely dislike each other and is on alike as Mr. Day and Mr. Harper and Mr. Manning is a challenge to run. It's like putting three tomcats of different breeds in a bag and seeing how they'll get along. I mean, it's very, very interesting to see what's happening there these days. At the provincial level, or at the city level, the province fired the entire Calgary Catholic School Board for misbehavior, although I understand the province does things like that around here these days. And the mother of our current mayor was accused of making threatening phone calls to one of his rivals during the last election campaign. Other than that, Michele, the political situation in Alberta is calm and very normal. it's a fascinating province for a political scientist. Let me tell you that it really is different. A number of years ago, one of my colleagues here wrote about the provincial political cultures, and I never really understood. People of immense generosity who take seriously their obligations as citizens as reflected in legendary levels of philanthropy. This is the other side of it. The fact that we are building from scratch, some of you have kindly asked, and so I'll just, Michael, if you don't mind, we're not direct competitors. I'll give a little plug about what we're doing out there. The fact that we are building from scratch what is rapidly becoming a thriving, fully integrated Catholic University college that is not affiliated, it's on its own, and we are on our own, as we are reminded when the bills come in every day, and hopefully will eventually be a full-fledged university, certainly not in the time of my career, but eventually. But all this is being done at the moment without the benefit of public funds whatsoever until we get further along in our development. That is a tribute to the incredible generosity of public spirited individuals that live in the city of Calgary and elsewhere. Enrollment at our college, which is located on a 35-acre site, which we just purchased from the Diocese of Calgary for $8.75 million. Enrollment has spiked by about 300% in the 3.5 years since I've been there. And to go with that, of course, we now have multi-million-dollar bills, operating and capital costs, which necessitate generous donations of multi-million dollars each year from donors. And so we very much depend on the kind of spirit, Michele, that you were talking about here earlier, and that is reflected in your own career. We teach the first 2 years of virtually every university discipline going, round up all the usual suspects, including a full range of humanities and social sciences, as well as math and business and computer science and biology and inorganic and organic chemistry. I actually know the difference now. Physics, human kinetics, and theology, and we are close to getting the right to give our own degrees. All of these developments are a remarkable tribute to the generosity of Calgarians who provide through donations all capital funds and 3/4 of our operating funds. So in that sense, it's a different kind of experience certainly than what I had here, and occasionally I look with great fondness to what it was like living in an institution where everything was up and running, and you actually didn't have people walking into your office handing you fan belts because a furnace had broken down. The first week I was there, somebody important, I forget who it was, came to see me and said, "What are you doing with a fan belt on your desk?" And I said, "Well, the machine, one of the boilers had just broken and the motor had gone and the fan belt was gone, and the janitor that we had at the time, this is before we staffed up, we have staffed up since. Janitor at the time had nobody else to take it to. Of course it goes to the president. Where else would it go?" So no wonder we don't have time to teach. So Michael, anyway, we're there. Aside from all the usual things that happen, but in any event, it's a pleasure to be here and to talk about the business of liberal arts, because that's what this institution is about, and that's what I very much was involved in here at the University of Waterloo. The process of building a new college, especially where there's no Catholic college tradition, is a challenge, and given these circumstances, we are constantly confronted with attempting to define what a good liberal arts Catholic college should look like. For us, the question of liberal arts in the 21st century is not simply a theoretical question, but one that we come to grips with every day as we make the crucial decisions that will determine the course of the college's educational objectives and philosophy for the decades to come. Making history in this manner is a demanding and sobering business, so that the whole business of where liberal arts go in the 21st century is it's crucial to the kinds of things that I actually do on a day-to-day basis and what we're doing in this college on a day-to-day basis. This very practical experience, combined with my career here of over two decades, Michele, here at the University of Waterloo, and interaction with colleagues here and at universities large and small throughout Canada, provide the assumptions that inform my address this evening in defense of nonconformity, liberal arts in the 21st century. Stated briefly, my three-part thesis is as follows. The first is that the imperatives of globalization that defined the 1990s and the opening months of this new century in North America inspired a non-relenting drive to conformity that narrowed the parameters of public and academic discourse, thereby imperiling the liberal arts tradition of unfettered inquiry, number one. Secondly, that the consequences are an educational environment that is conformist, intellectually introverted, and ethically vacuous, as amply demonstrated by the response in Canada and the USA to events of September the 11th, 2001, and concurrently to widespread accounting scandals that have decimated once thriving corporations and undermined confidence in the market. The third part of the thesis is this, that if universities are to have the requisite integrity and independence that their role demands, that the liberal arts tradition must be reinvigorated. Universities must do what they have always done in their periods of greatness, challenge orthodoxy, suggest to their students that there are other value systems, other goals in life beyond those worshipped by contemporary society. Questioning and challenging are the keys to the noble university. Questioning and challenging are the keys to the noble society. The two go together. So let me begin then on the first of these, about globalization. Then we'll talk about the effect it had on universities and then what happened on September the 11th and what that told us about the educational system on this continent. The globalization of the economy and its public policy counterpart, the neoliberal retreat from social responsibility and public care, is well documented. And it dominated public discourse and dictated public policy during much of the 1990s and the opening months of this century. These forces, invigorated by the collapse of the Berlin Wall and inspired constantly by the seduction of rampant materialism, represented capitalism triumphant, the amoral, and you'll notice I say amoral, not immoral, it's amoral, the amoral imperatives of the market, because the market is neither moral or immoral, the amoral imperatives of the market prevailed and threatened to sweep all before them. Efficiency, productivity, shareholder value, unfettered economic freedom became the norms of the seemingly inevitable drive to a nirvana of economic perfection. Public discourse was increasingly characterized by references to inevitability and to pragmatism. For every problem, there was apparently a best, value-free, usually inevitable solution. Governments used the term common sense in this province and in Alberta and elsewhere as the descriptive term for these policies. And this isn't a comment on the good or bad of the policies, but the point was that these policies were unrelentingly and pervasively and inherently ideological. No wonder such governments wanted to bury J.M. Keynes, because it was Keynes, after all, who said that those who purport to be basing public policy decisions on common sense are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. The tone of inevitability pervaded the attitudes and languages of the leaders in virtually all sectors of our society, including political, business, academic, media, and professional elites. We all know that the dominant culture in society interprets life from the perspective of the influential and the wealthy, for the very simple reason that they have the power to define reality. This is what we mean by the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. We know that. Taking advantage of the fears and the insecurities generated by globalization and mergers and public debt and stunning advances in technology, the breakdown of respect for institutions such as churches and marriage and schools and family, opinion leaders ever more brazenly advanced their own definition of the truth. A policy agenda that was not simply put forward as the appropriate one for society's ills, but as the only one, the inevitable one for society's ills. Consequently, the merger mania that characterized economic life in much of North America during the last decade, which witnessed an unprecedented series of acquisitions and takeovers and corporate mergers in the name of globalization, and the unleashing of the so-called dot-com revolution, went virtually unquestioned by business and academic leaders and commentators. There were a few respected observers, such as the now respected management guru Peter Drucker, who expressed grave reservations about the impact of such unbridled capitalism, but they too little heed was paid to this. Governments were hailed in all quarters for their economic successes in bringing down deficits and lessening regulation in the economy, and little attention was paid to the enormous costs in terms of child poverty, more than 1 million dependent on welfare by the end of the 1990s, cutbacks in education at all levels, less support for the poor and the sick, and no one seemed to notice, and virtually no one questioned, the immense power and wealth that was increasingly concentrated in the hands of high-living CEOs of some major corporations that have been much in the news since, as you know. What did this do to the university? The effects of globalization on the university were obvious as the 1990s ended and the new century began. All universities were under immense pressure to conform to the norms of the prevailing orthodoxy as defined by governments of the day, as well as many leaders in business and finance and the media were saying the same. The pressure took various forms, ranging from demands for relevance in terms of what was being taught and studied, relevance meaning training of our youth to fit quickly and neatly and unthinkingly into the workforce, to reductions in the amount of state support for post-secondary education, which discouraged interest in the liberal arts, while driving students in the directions of programs that provide training. The liberal arts were especially vulnerable to the priorities of a fiscal and public policy regimes that were driven by the imperatives of technology and a political culture mesmerized by the lure of efficiency and materialism. Universities, forced through ever more pervasive tide grant arrangements to become more relevant in their research and teaching, were increasingly forced to become more useful in meeting the immediate needs of the economy. These very deliberate strategies certainly threatened the liberal arts characters of universities. As one senior administrator wrote late in the decade, presidents, principals, and rectors frequently celebrate the liberal arts as the heart of their institution, but in resources they are much like the hole in the donut. But the most dangerous problem for liberal arts in universities was not the government and its fiscal persuasion. It was the enticement of the prevailing order that most threatened the integrity that must be at the heart of every university. If the major purposes of a university are, as we continue to insist, to question conventional wisdom, to invite the young to be skeptical of authority and to challenge conformity and convention, to critically examine the adequacies of society's objectives and values, and to consider alternatives, why were so many students graduating from our universities without any serious studies of ethics, values, or the social context in which they would live their lives and practice their professions? Thoughtful observers ranging from everyone from John Ralston Saul on the one hand to the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops on the other, and that's a fair stretch, were among various Canadians who lamented the characteristics of the research-dominated universities. The draining of ethical and value content out of academic disciplines, the turning of disciplines from their true objective of creating a better society to an obsession with so-called rationality. This and other evidence suggesting a turning away from the ideal of the properly Catholic or universal institution to one increasingly characterized by regimentation and specialization. In their long and storied history, universities have fought for autonomy, first from the church and then from the state, so that they could be unencumbered and free in the pursuit of knowledge. That's what they're for. Since the dawning of the age of reason, a driving force in university life has been to make human reason the sole basis for deciding the great questions that consistently confront us. This triumph of reason approach has its own problems, because in order to overcome what they saw as irrationality or superstition in the case of faith-based institutions, they took on a new religion called rationality. The positive side is that universities did, in their good periods at least, what they're called to do: challenge conventional wisdom. Nothing was to be taken on faith. Everything had to be challenged and proven. But in our era, apparently free from dogma and ideology, many academics became the slaves of another dogma and ideology: rationality. This is not to deny the remarkable progress that has been made in the natural sciences as a result of the application of the scientific method. Advances in modern medicine as well as in technology have been stunning, as we know. But many of these have come at the cost of the increasing specialization which characterizes the modern university, with the result that many highly skilled people graduate without having seriously studied, as I mentioned, ethics, values, or the social context in which they will operate. Those who study the social sciences are in no less compromised. The scientific method, which has been adopted as the framework for studies of society, including the economy and including politics, has been hailed as promoting value-free social science, but such is not the case. A particular interest in this regard is the discipline of economics. Economics began as a moral science. Its original objective was to create a better society, one in which wealth would be used to improve the common welfare and the common good. But over time, it is a discipline which has become obsessed not with human beings as they are, but with overly rational people who don't exist. And if you don't believe that, just think of all the irrational acts any of us do in any given day. Over time, it is a discipline which has become obsessed then with these rational people that don't exist. Human beings are reduced to self-interested machines in which there's no place for values or compassion or doubt. This is a discipline that counts and calculates rather than feels and cares. And in fairness to my economic friends who are economists, and I do have some, you'll be glad to know, there's a broad range of what economists find as acceptable. In terms of the discipline, the comments I've just made come from people who are in the discipline. My own discipline, not to pick on anybody else, political science, is in many ways no better. Only during the past decade are some public policy scholars beginning to recognize that non-rational considerations such as creativity and intuition are important factors to contemplate if we are to understand public policy. I taught a course here, Michele knows, for many years, called The Politics of Canadian Resource Development. And we looked at all the oil industry and the mining industry and all that. It was a very interesting course for people taught by somebody like myself from Southern Ontario, taken by people from Southern Ontario. But it opened our eyes because we looked at the economy of various provinces. It was a very popular course. But I taught that course for 15 years before I found a source that reminded me that if we're to understand the economy of this country, we should look at the role of women. That was not part of the literature. The literature was always, there's so much shipping and so many pounds of this and so many pounds of that. And Marjorie Cohen, bless her soul, who was at OISE at the time and is now, I think, at Simon Fraser University, wrote a book outlining the role of women in the economy, and that the reason this had never been studied before is because in the earlier years, at least, women weren't in the wage economy. And if you weren't in the wage economy, you didn't count for anything. And she did this very interesting study, and I incorporated this into my course, this very interesting study of the role of women and the rise of the industrialism, the role of women in the workforce during the war and so on, where we actually could see the impact that they had. And it made me look critically at my own profession, saying, how come we didn't think about these things before? How come this literature wasn't in the mainstream until approximately about 10 years ago? As Ellen Wolfe, a political scientist at Boston College, had written, some social scientists want to reduce all human activity to one dimension, a reductionism that violates conceptions of the person, emphasizing our complex and often contradictory nature. If St. Augustine had been a rational choice theorist, as some political economists are, he would never have compared the city of man to the city of God, for instance. The point is, there's no such thing as value-free social science. For all the protests to the contrary, it is value-laden and perhaps even less tolerant than the faith it is so critical of. It's important to note, and this is one of the best arguments I think that could be made for liberal arts, is that the most incisive analysis of society and the university has come in recent years not from the social scientists, no matter how sophisticated our methodology, and I count myself as one of them, but rather from the creative literary arts, which are the product of the rich liberal arts interdisciplinary tradition that emphasizes history and culture and literature and art and logic and theology and religion. As a consequence, it is the playwrights, the novelists, and the poets who have most consistently summoned the courage and demonstrated the creativity requisite to enable us to get a glimpse of ourselves as individuals and as a society. It is the creative literary artists who have constituted the courageous vanguard in the battles for religious and racial and gender and political tolerance and understanding. It is the creative literary artists that have led the way in enabling us to see our own foibles and to gain a sense of the potential nobility that is in each one of us. And it's the creative literary artists that have inspired an appreciation of the complexities of the society in which we live and insights into the possibilities of the good society. And in the global economy that has seemingly treasured conformity above everything else, it is those same people who have reminded us that when all is said and done, there's quite a bit more to life than money or trade or professional success, as Dana mentioned in her very eloquent introduction this evening. It is they who have shown us that nonconformity is always a respectable option. In view of these considerations, it's not surprising that the most insightful analysis of universities in recent years have come from the poets and from the writers and from the playwrights. The South American writer Eduardo Galeano tells us that universities train us not to see. Education uneducates, as demonstrated by the fact there is no shortage of intellectuals who are prepared to tell us that the free expression of poets is equivalent to the free speculation of bankers. It's not quite the same thing, but lots of people have been telling us that. He writes that, quote, in Latin America and throughout the Third World, business freedom not only has nothing to do with the freedom of people, the two are mutually incompatible, as demonstrated by obscene maldistribution of wealth and terrible bloodshed perpetrated by dictators in the name of economic freedom. Václav Havel, the writer and playwright who has served as president of the Czech Republic, kind of a strange combination of careers there, he goes to the heart of the issue and the role of the university and the intellect. He warns that there's always something suspect about an intellectual on the winning side. He said, you got to be watched for that. These examples evoke images of the unquestioning ease with which universities as institutions and many academics within them have identified with and moved with the status quo in recent years. We have moved away from what John Kenneth Galbraith said the purpose of the university was. He also said this about the purpose of the discipline of economics, and he learned it apparently from a professor of his at Harvard many years before, whose name escapes me at the moment, but he said the purpose of the university is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. That's kind of what we should be doing, and we've moved away from that. and in this that we're very much in accordance with the times. We live in a society, in a country, and in an age when there's enormous pressure to always be on side. There's little room for eyebrow raising or debate, much less challenging questions or outright disagreement. Aside from the odd juicy scandal now and then, when was the last time a major university did something to raise eyebrows or to provoke meaningful debate on a major public policy issue? Think about it. And as a member of that community of institutions, you're hard-pressed to think of an example. And then came September the 11th. And the horrific events that ripped to the core of the smug tranquility that has characterized public and academic life in Canada and the United States since the collapse of the Berlin Wall. The enormous sufferings of our friends and neighbors, and the horrific nature of the brutal deeds that took mothers and fathers and children and wives and husbands and brothers and sisters, leaving empty chairs at tables that will haunt families for generations. This presents a challenge to all scholars, committed first and foremost to seek truth in all matters and to live out our lives in accordance with what we find. We have an obligation to search for a clear understanding of the immeasurable complexities of those events, including the various forces, historical, cultural, social, economic, political, religious, that have brought us to this crucial point in our history. This scholarly obligation involves, of course, sincere attempts to draw lessons from these events, including, in this case, an understanding that the fear and terror and their insecurity that have characterized the United States since September the 11th, 2001, and Canada as well, is typical of life in too many nations on this planet. We have been immune, especially in Canada, from seeing much of this until now, because such events and sufferings were for other people in Northern Ireland, in the Middle East, in South America, and in Africa. They weren't for us. For Canadians, the strategic security of living in the military shadow of the richest and most powerful empire in history has seduced us into believing that we actually deserve the security and immunity from hardship and violence and sudden death that are characteristic of life in too many parts of this planet. And if you don't believe that, you can just think of what I read in the Globe and Mail coming down here in the plane on Tuesday and sense that this so-called list of targets in Canada, whoever made up that list doesn't know much about Canadian history or geography, but anyway, wherever it came from, Clayton Powell said he didn't do it. But the list of saying, isn't this terrible? You mean Canada's, yeah? Get real. Of course we could be a target. Of course some of those things could be a target. In the Globe and Mail, and this, I talk a little bit later about irresponsible journalism. The Globe and Mail and the National Post, really deserve a good kick in the rear end, both of them, for the way that they handled that thing. This is a very serious matter, but the way it was handled, did you make the list or not? I mean, I felt badly about Calgary. They want to crash into it during the Stampede Park. There's not much there. There's a lot of other buildings downtown that might be more attractive targets. But the whole exercise was an exercise in silliness as far as I was concerned. But think about it for the moment. We've been seduced into believing that we actually deserve the security and immunity from hardship and violence that are characteristic of life in pretty near every place in the world. The lessons of this are clear. One of the lessons from September the 11th are clear. Deprivation and suffering and violence and death are too much a part of the human condition in all parts of the universe. And as scholars, we have to ask the hard question as to why this is the situation. That's one thing we get out of September the 11th. But more to the point of the topic this evening, if there's any doubt that the liberal arts educational ethic that should animate the good university has a place in society, we need only to remind ourselves of the aftermath of those events. Among the major lessons to be learned from the catastrophe that hit our neighbors to the south is the insight it provides on the state of post-secondary education in North America. And I speak of Canada and the United States when I refer to North America. The widespread bewilderment, and that is the most common characteristics I think that was there, the widespread bewilderment that characterized reactions to the events of September the 11th demonstrates in startling and sobering terms the heavy price to be paid for the narrow specialization and technological obsession that has increasingly defined university in Canada and the United States in recent years. This and the concomitant decline in the strong liberal arts foundation help to explain the profound ignorance and lack of appreciation for different cultures and religions and languages to be found among what is supposedly the best educated populace in history. For the first time in the lives of many of us, Canada and the United States are seen as vulnerable, and it has become clear that our collective knowledge of the history and the geography and the politics and the cultures and the religions of much of the rest of the world is abysmal. In addition, the acquiescent response of the news media and the vocal silence of even distinguished academics to the draconian anti-democratic measures that have been taken by panic-stricken leaders demonstrates a dearth of professional ethics, in my view, and remarkably anemic intellectual standards, even among the most sophisticated and the best educated. The quandary for scholars is this. The scholars in all institutions, how can we view the events of September the 11th with forgiveness instead of retaliation, understanding instead of rage, rationality instead of polemics, and scholarship instead of raw emotion? These are the questions that challenge us to define what we mean by liberal arts in the post-September the 11th world. In my comments that follow, I discuss liberal arts in both the secular and, given that this is a Catholic university, in the Catholic university as well. But what can we learn from that? Because it did demonstrate that, and this was admitted by commentators and even by people in government who were directly involved. They didn't know. We don't know what's happening there. There was a colleague of mine in the political science department 10 years ago, Ashok Kapoor is currently the chairman of that department, who said to me, there was a book written in 1989, I think it was, called The End of History. And it reflected the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and basically they said, we've got it solved now, we're in great shape, no worries about anything. And Ashok, Dr. Kapoor said to me, he said, they don't realize there's an Islamic world out there, for one thing. And what happened showed the ignorance that was there. So this is where liberal arts come in, done properly. At the outset, so what's the measure for this? This is the third. You'll be glad to know I'm on the third part, so this does come to an end. At the outset, it is evident that liberal arts in the 21st century must, by definition, challenge conformity. The aftermath of September the 11th has amply demonstrated the heavy price to be paid for the compromised intellectual integrity of a university system that has been undermined by an obsession with the practical and with the particular. Society as a whole is now bearing the cost of the technically driven, intellectually conformist, increasingly specialized university where even highly skilled professionals may graduate without seriously having studied history or philosophy or religion or literature or ethics, or the social context in which they will practice their professions and live their lives. Accordingly, many specialists, including scientists, apply the most powerful ideas and technologies ever invented, and yet they do so without any sense of the historical precedents for the potential misuse or deleterious effects of their expertise. They leave university remarkably unprepared to deal with the potentially overwhelming moral and ethical questions which they will inevitably be confronted in their professional and in their personal lives. If we are to be true to the educational objectives and philosophy of liberal arts education, there cannot exist such an intellectually introverted and ethically vacuous environment in any good university. The rich liberal arts interdisciplinary tradition
that emphasizes the study of the history and the understanding of cultures and an appreciation of literature and art, and a grasp of philosophy and an understanding of theology and religion must be vigorously present. The pursuit of wisdom leaves no room for smug conformity. Teaching and learning are subversive activities. Advances in disciplines are only possible as a consequence of unyielding and ongoing critiques of traditional scholarship. That's what learning is. Just as the good society is the product of unyielding and ongoing critiques of the status quo. John Stuart Mill's observation, and Michele's a political scientist, she appreciates John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill's observation that teacher and learner alike fall asleep at their posts when there's no enemy in the field demonstrates the point. In the good liberal arts program, and especially those in the good Catholic universities, I'll talk about both in the same breath here, there can be no self-censorship, a distressing and well-documented characteristics among polite academic company and even top-flight universities. It's not that what is taught is bad, it's what is not said that should be said, that isn't said for various reasons. This was brought home to me in an application. I get some interesting applications where I am now because it's a small institution, the classes are small, and people like to teach in that environment. And I got an application from somebody teaching in one of the big universities in Alberta. Said, "Dear Downey, I am a Baptist," first sentence. "And I want to teach at your institution because I want to teach at some place where I don't have to be embarrassed about my beliefs." And that told me a great deal. What do you mean you're embarrassed about your beliefs in a university? Universities are supposed to be places where you can talk about anything. And that is what we mean by self-censorship. It has been well documented in the value-free kind of so-called ideal of the many universities. There's a substantial bias against broadening the kinds of things that are seen as acceptable academic subjects, encouraging people to study theology or religion and so on. It's one of the things I'm dealing with right now. And when you say that to people, they think that you want to indoctrinate people, and that's not what it's for. It's to show them that there's a broad range of things out there they should look at and understand. There cannot be in any good university an academic culture that encourages self-censorship. In any reputable liberal arts program, whether in the secular or the good Catholic university, there is and can be no room for bias against certain disciplines or perspectives. That's why we're at university. That's why people come, to learn all that they possibly can. There should be no self-censorship or confining specialization. If any or all are present, the university, whatever it is, cannot be either Catholic, either in large C Catholic or small C Catholic, because it would be a betrayal of the origins and purpose of a university, which should be a center of creativity and the dissemination of knowledge, where there should be joy for searching for and communicating truth in every field of knowledge. God gave us minds with which to think, and we have an obligation to use them and to confront all issues, no matter how difficult or embarrassing or unconventional, controversial. That's what universities are for. The late Northrop Frye had a great comment made at a convocation at the University of Toronto, apparently where he was speaking, and he said to the students, I wish you well as you leave the real world of the university to go out into the ivory towers of business and finance. And he had it right. The university shouldn't be the ivory tower. It should be the place that opens up understanding and studies of all things. This is particularly true, if I can just say as an aside, on the study of ethics. I mean, 10 years ago, or a little 12, 13, Michele, about the time you graduated, I'll add a couple years just to be safe. But you remember in the 80s there was a great fuss on Wall Street, and you had people were selling stocks and all that. What was it? Michael Milliken was his name? Anyway, he went to jail he made $80 million and went to jail, and he's now presumably spending it. I don't know what he's doing. But there was a big fuss about this, and so the business schools in the United States in particular, and also in Canada, said, we've got to start teaching people ethics in the MBA programs. And I read article after article of it, and We talked about it in some of the classes that I was doing on public administration where we studied professional ethics. Anyway, that went by the board. Now we've got all the scandals that are coming out. I'm reading the same stuff in the paper, and one in particular by a professor from a very distinguished business school in Ohio who said, we've got to start teaching these business students ethics. We don't want this to happen when our graduates go out there and they're going to be cooking the books and all that sort of stuff that's going on. But then they said to him, okay, you're going to teach them ethics. And he said, you're damn right, we're going to teach them ethics. And they said, well, how are you going to do it? And he said, well, we don't know anything about ethics because we don't know the terminology. We'll send them over to the philosophy department and they'll get a course in ethics and then that'll solve it. And that's not how it's done. There's a problem there. It's one of the things that this is what liberal arts is all about, that those kinds of considerations, I used to say to my students, Michele, as you may or may not remember, that the purpose of this course is to teach you that when you trip over an ethical dimension, you'll recognize what you just tripped over, and that therefore this is something that should be a consideration. In addition to that, in the good liberal arts, there should be no reason then to hesitate to study things like faith and reason. There should be no hesitate to study and ponder not only our own beliefs and our own cultures and our own societies, but we should also have the confidence, and it is confidence. It is confidence, and I hear this all the time as a Catholic president saying, well, why would you want to bring in the rabbi to teach a course in Judaism? This is a Catholic college. Why do you want to do this? And what's missing here is an understanding of what education is about. If we really believe what we claim to believe, we should have the confidence to examine the beliefs and teachings of every faith and culture and to be welcoming to students of every faith and background. In post-September the 11th, I shouldn't really have to say that, and I hope it'll change some of the curriculum, some universities, but you can see why this should be done. The potential of the Catholic or secular university can be only realized by having confidence in its purpose and its vision. Such confidence will promote respect for freedom of conscience and the integrity of the faculty and students who don't share in your expression of faith or in your culture or don't happen to have the same color of skin or whatever that is. Lack of confidence in purpose and in vision leads to ambiguity and a dwelling on differences, and that can lead to a destructive demand for conformity within the institution. And conformity is not in accordance with the search for the whole truth, which is what we do at universities. Truth about nature, about people, about the divine, that defines the good secular and the good Catholic university. All of these things should be under consideration. If the university is to be truly Catholic in the small c sense, universal that is, and Catholic, if you want to talk about large C Catholic institutions as well, it must be a place where every sincere and thoughtful person is welcomed, heard, and respected, where belief and unbelief, certainty and uncertainty are pondered and argued and discussed civilly and thoughtfully, where ideas are judged solely on academic merit, as judged by the appropriate academic methods of each discipline. A university isn't a cocoon. It should be an intellectually unruly place. Research and teaching, done properly, are by definition subversive activities, as I've mentioned, because every idea, no matter how firmly held, if we're to educate properly, every idea is summoned before the high court of human reason and evaluated and examined in light of the values and beliefs that we have. That's the purpose of the good, and that's the activity that should be found in the good institution. Pascal warns scholars that there are two equally dangerous extremes: to shut reason out and to let nothing else in. And what that means is you can't take things on faith only, nor can you examine them strictly on so-called rational basis. To shut reason out and to let nothing else in, those are the two extremes, he warns. In the spirit of an educational philosophy that includes promoting understanding for and respect for the inherent dignity that defines each one of us, we should strive to encourage and to enhance understanding of spirituality of all students. We should enhance our understanding of Christian and non-Christian traditions, and those from no particular religious tradition. That should be part of an education in a university so that we understand the world that's out there and the forces that are out there. As an academic community which in a rigorous and critical fashion assists in the protection and advancement of human dignity and of cultural heritage, liberal arts should be an accommodating meeting ground for the great religious traditions and cultures of the world. In the good university, understanding of cultural and religious difference is pursued and appreciated. Every university seeks meaning. And there are individuals within every university who include moral and ethical and spiritual dimensions in their teaching and in their research. But universities as an institution has an obligation to consider these dimensions in the quest for understanding. You don't ignore any part of this. Whether you believe it or not is another matter, but you don't ignore it because it's there. Okay? The university has a role to play in this day and age that is uniquely concerned about the major issues which confront us. Governments and the private sector and the great research universities are much preoccupied these days devising ways to create wealth and to develop new technologies. All very important and all very worthy pursuits. But it should also be kept in mind, and this is where liberal art comes in, that the major problems facing society are not always as they are defined by the prevailing order. Perhaps the main challenge isn't how to create wealth, but rather to determine how to distribute it in a socially just manner. Perhaps the major problem isn't simply how to develop more sophisticated technology, but rather to ponder the staggering complexities of technology and how these might be handled morally and ethically. By tradition and by calling and by inclination, universities are uniquely capable of addressing these issues. If universities are to have their integrity and the independence that their role demands, they must do what they have always done in their periods of greatness. And I'm repeating a point I made earlier, but it's worth repeating. They must resist the easy and profitable road of subservience to the prevailing order. It is their duty to challenge orthodoxy and to suggest to their students that there are other value systems, other goals in life, beyond those worshipped by contemporary society. Questioning and challenging are the keys to the noble university and the keys to the noble society, as I mentioned. The university must ask the searching questions. It must ensure that the university and society hear not only those who do speak, but also those who do not speak and those who cannot speak. Society needs universities as a visible sign of our innately human capacity to extend our vision beyond the particular interests that have captivated society's imagination. The various examples I have used here illustrate the necessity of the strong liberal arts tradition, whether it's in the secular or the Catholic university, a tradition that focuses on the totality of the person, a university that seeks to inspire in its students disciplines, habits of mind and body and in spirit that should define the well-educated person. A university that consistently searches for meaning with a view to ensuring that advances in economics and technology are turned to the authentic good of individuals and to society as a whole. All of what I have said here means that we must keep in mind a couple of major points if we are to have a strong liberal arts component, whether in the secular or the Catholic university. First, as Václav Havel has said, and I'll repeat it here, we must always remember there's something suspect about an intellectual on the winning side. This is not an easy standard to follow. It's easier to be on the winning side. Secondly, we should also keep in mind what Mordecai Richler wrote in Barney's version. Quote, "The truth is Canada is a cloud cuckoo land, an insufferably rich country governed by people he says aren't very good, I won't say the word, governed by bad people, so he says, it's self-made problems, he said governed by idiots, so there you go, okay. It's unfair to people in public life. And anyway, let me just repeat the whole quote now. The truth is Canada is a cloud cuckoo land, an insufferably rich country governed by idiots. Its self-made problems offering comic relief to the ills of the real world out there, where famine and racial strife and vandals in office are the unhappy rule. He's saying as Canadians, not just what Havel says about academics, but as Canadians we should get a life and appreciate what's here. No, we don't appreciate the potential nobility of this country, appreciate what's here to give us perspective to address what should be addressed in our educational institutions. You could keep these difficult notions must be accepted and kept in mind and lived if we're to actually practice the liberal arts we preach. In terms of everyday actions, as we enter classrooms, and that's where it happens, we must always keep in the forefront the underlying aim of the university, the ardent and unrelenting search for truth that opens the way to all possibilities. Once the avenue to truth is possessed, all else is within our grasp. Wisdom and understanding and sensitivity and compassion and responsibility and intellectual honesty and personal integrity. The search for truth is the means to break the shackles of ignorance and of doubt and of frustration. It frees those who respond from the bonds of materialism or poverty or despair or bigotry or racism or intolerance. The search for truth inspires all to recognize and accept their own worth and abilities, to develop their talents and their potential, to earn respect for and to gain an appreciation of their own inherent dignity. As we look at the future of universities, it is obvious that no one can know how the 21st century will unfold. Who can predict the intricacies of the political and economic and religious and cultural forces that will challenge a non-just global status quo? Who can imagine the staggering technological advances that are likely to revolutionize how we live and how we learn and how we love in this century? What we do know for sure, and all we need to know in order to face the future with hope and confidence, is the enduring mission of the liberal arts tradition in the good university, a place that fosters an unwavering commitment to search for truth and meaning that will enable people to come to the full measure of their being. It is this spirit of hope that must animate the university in the 21st century, a confidence that what we do and say as individuals, and we have an example here tonight in the person that won this award, Michele, a confidence that what we do and say as individuals and what the university does and stands for as an institution really matters as we engage in the task of building a better world based on sound ethical and moral principles. Thank you.